Alright guys, today I'm going to show you how to wire your grow out racks to a timer or directly into the wall outlet if you choose to use a switch. I'll show you two different ways to do it so you can choose whether you use a timer or to use switches if you can't afford the timers or if it just makes more sense for you to use a switch. What you're going to need is you're going to need a 4" by 4" junction box. You're going to need a switch if you choose to run a switch. If you do choose to run a switch, the switch that you want to get has two brass screws on it. There's a bunch of different kinds of switches. This is a standard switch, only costs a couple of dollars. You've got a brass screw on the bottom, brass screw on top. On the other side you're going to have one green screw. There's a couple of switches with a black screw on the bottom and two brass on top. You don't want to get that one. You want to stray away from all those kinds of switches. You just want to get a very basic, very simple switch, 15 amp. And a box for it to go into. Okay, it doesn't have to be exactly this kind of style of box. Whatever box fits your needs. This is the one that I went with only because of this display. The light fixtures that you want to use for your heat lights, as you already know, are going to be porcelain. This one's plastic. This is just for the display. I just have a house light in there to show you that the power is going to work. But for your heat bulbs, you want to use this fixture here is going to be porcelain. Also, on this fixture here, you also want to note that there is a brass, where is it? There it is, a brass screw on one side and a nickel or silver colored screw on the other side. The colors are very important, as the brass screw, the gold colored screw, is going to take your black wire, and the nickel or silver colored screw is going to take your white wire. You might notice that on the switch here, I said both of these are brass screws, and you see one white wire here which goes against what I just said on the light. There's a reason for that. We'll get to that later, but you want to remember brass screw, black, silver screw, white wire. On your power coming in, you can use any kind of cord really that you want to use for the power coming in. You want to make sure that it's not too small. For this one I just used an extension cord that was laying around. That was pretty heavy duty. You want to note that it has a black wire, a white wire, and a green ground wire. The green ground wire is very important on your power coming in. It's not so important on your power going to your lights, but you want to make sure that your power coming in has a green ground wire and the wiring going to your switch has a green ground wire. If you choose to use an extension cord or Romex, your Romex is going to have this green ground wire, but in your Romex it's a solid copper wire. This is used for your ground. Solid copper wire, ground, takes place of your green wire. There are a couple different kinds of Romex and styles of Romex. This is what we call a 14-3. 14 is the gauge. 3 is the amount of wires besides your ground wire. You don't need 14-3. You can go with 14-2. If you go with 14-2, it's going to have your ground wire, a white neutral wire, and a black wire. It's not going to have this red wire here. This red wire is not going to be used, but I just had it laying around. So you're going to need, again, 14-2 with a white wire and a black wire. This will be for the wiring going to your switch or to your lights. If you currently have a light duty wire going to your lights, you can reuse that. It will be something in this gauge. It'll look similar to this. You'll see that two wires go to it. The end of the part that plugs into the wall, or your prongs, are going to look like this. If you choose to reuse this wire going to your lights, you can. There's going to be many of them depending on how many lights that you're going to wire. Don't be overwhelmed. If you have 6, 7, 8 lights, it all works the same. We're going to tie them all together. One thing you want to note, you're going to need to cut the part that plugs into the wall, or the prongs. You're going to need to cut those off to hardwire them into your junction box. When you do that, you want to label which wire goes where. The smaller prong represents your black wire, the larger prong represents your white wire. So before we cut it off, I separated the two wires and I put some electrical tape around what's going to represent our black wire and some masking tape around what represents our white wire. Then we can go ahead and went ahead and snipped the end off, and now I have a white wire and a black wire. Then we can go ahead and put it into our junction box and wire from there. One important thing is you always want to have connectors going from your cord or your Romex down into your junction box. This is the connector you want to use. It's called a squeeze connector. They sell them in 3/8 at your hardware store, Lowe's, Home Depot. They come with a nut and the squeeze connector and the clamp. You punch out your knockout right here. You put the clamp down in there like so, and then your nut threads onto the squeeze connector and holds it into place. When you're mounting your junction box, one thing you want to make sure of is that you have enough slack in your wiring to get all your wiring in there and have about 4 or 5 inches left over. One thing I would recommend is when you're going to wire heat lights and UV lights for your reptiles, I would recommend going with 2 junction boxes unless you have some experience with electricity and you can squeeze a bunch of wire in here. You're going to have a whole lot of wire stuffed in one box. If you do it that way, you can still do it, but if you're going to run heat lights and UVB lights, I would recommend getting 2 boxes, one for the heat lights and one for the UV lights. Okay, so once we get all our wiring ran into the junction box, again we've labeled it power in to the lights and to the switch, you can start wiring. You're going to have a bunch of wires that look like this sticking out. Romex is one solid wire in the center there. If you don't have one solid wire and it's a bunch of these little wires, you want to twist the end of the wire clockwise, always clockwise. So when you start here, you want to start by wiring your green wires together and your white wires together. I'm going to show you how to do this without the switch. So if you want to hardwire all of your wiring without a switch, so that way you can just plug your cord here into your timer and let your timer do all the work, I'm going to show you how to do that. You start off with your greens, you start off with your whites, you tie those together. If you're not using a switch, you can connect the power from your cord coming in to your lights. You can connect those 2 black wires. If you are using a switch, you're going to start with the green and then the white, or the white and the green. You want to get those out of the way, splice all those together. And before I get too much further, you're going to say, well, hey Josh, you got a bunch of wires coming in from your lights, because you're going to have multiple lights. You're going to have, I don't know, maybe 6 of these on a very different scale. Of course, they're going to be this gauge. But you're going to have a bunch of wires coming in from your lights. So you're going to have a lot of whites and you're going to have a lot of blacks. Tie all your whites together, and then we'll go to the next step. You can tie all of your blacks in with this one wire coming from your extension cord. You can tie that all in there, and when you do that, you want to twist the wires together clockwise, always clockwise again, and once those wires are together, you put your wire nut over it. If you are not running a switch, once all of these wires are secure and the clamps don't come off, and you can see this one came off, but I'm trying to put it on one-handed. Once your wire nuts are secure, like this one is here and this one is here, once they're secure, you go ahead and put your cover over it and you're done. If you're going to run a switch, you want to do your green wires and white wires again, all of them, and then you take your black wire coming from the extension cord and you run it to, you notice coming from this connector, I've got a black wire and a white wire that are coming from the switch. You run your power from your extension cord into the black wire. You go ahead and twist those together. I'm going to put my phone down here first. If it seems shaky, it's because I'm recording from a phone. Sorry about that. I don't have a camera or a second person right now available to help me hold the camera. So I'm going to twist these together, put my phone down for a second, get a wire nut on there. Okay, so you can see now I've got my black wire coming from my extension cord and the black wire coming from my switch. I've got the wire nut on there real tight. Then you come over to your switch and you put the black wire, I don't know if you can see it, but the black wire is connected to the bottom screw on the switch. You can connect it to the top or the bottom, it doesn't matter. Whenever I'm wiring, I always connect my power coming into the bottom screw. I don't know why, it just makes more sense to me that way. Like I said, it doesn't matter. You put it on the bottom screw here, and then you're going to have your other wire, your white wire, connected up here. Normally your white wire represents your neutral. Some call it the negative, but the proper name for your white wire is your neutral wire. With this, we're not really paying attention to the color. This is just, we're going to call it our power coming away from the switch, or coming out of the switch. So we follow our power coming back out of the switch to the connector that's labeled switch at our junction box, and this is our power coming out of the switch. Again, it's a white wire. It's really important you make a note of that when you're doing a switch. Your white wire coming from your switch is going to act like a black wire or a hot wire. Sometimes it doesn't follow the rules of electricity, but hey, that's what we got to do. So you want to connect your white wire coming from your switch to the wire going to your lights, or to the wires going to your lights. Again, you'll twist this on there clockwise, never counterclockwise, always clockwise. Twist it on there real good, and I'm going to put a wire nut on this one again. Okay, so it's on there nice and tight. So let's go over the steps one more time. You want to start with a heavy-duty power cord coming in, and you're going to have a black wire, a white wire, and a green ground wire. The green ground wire, again, is very important. If you're using a switch, the black wire goes to the bottom screw of your switch. Then you will have power coming out of your switch through your switch wire into your junction box, and this power will go to your lights. The white wire coming out of your lights will be connected to the white wire from your power in, and your green ground wires will all be connected together. One note here is, if you choose to, you don't have to, and electricians will argue with this and some won't argue with this. If you want to, you can put a fourth wire. You can see that there's 1, 2, 3 wires going into this wire nut. You can put a fourth wire in there that's about 4 or 5 inches long, and you can screw it somewhere into the screws that go into your junction box. You don't have to do that because we're just trying to get ground into our switch, but you can if you choose to, if it makes you feel more comfortable. It doesn't really do anything. It's not very imperative that you do it, but if it makes you feel comfortable, there's nothing wrong with it either. So green wires together, white wires together. I've just showed you what you're going to do. I've recapped what you're going to do if you're going to use a switch. If you're not going to use a switch, you go power in this black wire directly to the black wire for your lights. Those two will be tied together and you'll be done. You want to make sure to do all of your wiring with your power coming in. Obviously, it's going to be unplugged. So we go over to plug it in once you're all done. So now I've got it plugged in, and you can see that the light comes on when you switch it on. Switch it off, light goes off, on and off. So if you hardwire it without a switch, then you will plug your extension cord side into your timer, and your timer will turn your power on and off. Your timer will act as your switch. So I hope this helps. Go ahead in the comments to feel free to ask any questions. Make sure that you get some zip ties, wire ties, tape, whatever method you choose to secure your wire, you're going to want to make sure your wire is nice and secure to your grow out rack or to somewhere behind your cage. Like I said, your whatever way you choose to do it. For this display, I chose to use zip ties. Zip ties are great. If you feel like moving the wire, you can cut the zip tie and move the wire wherever you need to. Fixture, heat lights. Make sure it's porcelain, or else it will melt the plastic. I think that's it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.